tell what's out there. Hey, are you listening? Hey!
As soon as I arrived in Resident Evil Village's sinister rural setting, its Resident Evil 4 influence reared its snarling head. It's an intense welcome that serves as a fantastic flashback to the opening of Shinji Mikami's magnum-toting magnum opus, and one made all the more frantic in first-person perspective. Resident Evil Village might not break much new ground in its own right, but it successfully grafts Resident Evil 4's best action elements onto the series' more modern form established in Resident Evil 7, making for a genuinely engrossing and increasingly combat-heavy continuation of the Ethan Winters story. It's a story that, unfortunately for poor old Ethan, goes from dire straits to dire wolves. Dragged to hillbilly hell and back in an effort to rescue his wife in Resident Evil 7, he now finds himself dropped into a distinctly Transylvanian type of terror in Village.
Where the hell am I?
This time it's his infant daughter who must be saved after she's kidnapped by a wicked cabal of monster maniacs. And although admittedly none of them managed to conjure up the same kind of genuine scares as the southern fried psychopaths in Resident Evil 7,
You're stupid.
I found a lot of them to be entertainingly twisted in a slightly cartoonish Batman villain kind of way.
Lycans and gentlemen!
Each presides over their own visually distinctive domain that you must survive, with noticeable shifts in mood between each setting. One demands a more stealth-driven approach, while another takes a departure into more psychological horror than combat, delving into the darkest corners of Village's world and uncovering the real reason these fairy tale freaks have come into existence in the present day, made for a compelling mystery that hooked me throughout my 10-hour playthrough.
Death has visited them all.
One of Resident Evil 7's most notable shortcomings was the lack of variety in its enemy types, but Village remedies this by throwing a significantly broader set of nasties into your crosshairs. In fact, the last time there was a lineup of Village people this diverse, they were singing disco songs about the YMCA. This expanded roster of bloodthirsty beasts doesn't just make for a more interestingly evolving series of combat encounters, but it also adds some welcome new depth and decision-making to the bolstered crafting system. Should you spend your scarce supply of scrap to cobble together a landmine that will blast the armor off one of the tank-like Lycans, or fashion it into sniper rifle rounds so that you can eliminate nesting gargoyles from afar before they have a chance to swoop down on you? Granted, most of these enemies aren't particularly clever in their own right. The genetically modified mutants of this underground Frankenstein factory might have deadly drills for arms, but they're far from the sharpest tools in the shed when it comes to outmaneuvering you one-on-one. Still, what Village's variety of grunts may lack in smarts, they certainly make up for in sheer numbers.
There's no end to them.
And although I rarely encountered clusters of more than a handful of enemies at a time for the first few hours, by the story's end I was gleefully indulging in chaotic levels of carnage that reminded me more of a run-and-gun Call of Duty campaign than a slow-paced horror game. That's a pretty big change from the philosophy of Resident Evil 7's first half, and a throwaway reference to military training in the prologue is used to explain why Ethan feels substantially more combat ready this time around.
Military training, it all happened so fast.
He's better equipped to stay on the move during a scrap, and can even shoot down flaming arrows Leon Kennedy style. Certain location-specific environmental features also help to further even the overwhelming odds, and freshen up each fight as you move from one unique area to another.
I've been waiting for you, Mr. Winters.
The Duke, a tubby trader who can be conveniently found in various locations around the map like a Transylvanian 7-Eleven, allows you to buy weapon add-ons and upgrades as well as limited amounts of medkits and ammunition. But what I appreciated the most about Capcom effectively resurrecting Resident Evil 4's merchant is that the Duke's stiff prices forced me to pore over every square inch of Village's stunning scenery in search of treasures to trade for spending money, which had the knock-on effect of leading me to a number of surprises, both pleasant and malevolent.
Some treasures still lurk in this village.
Studying your surroundings for the telltale glint of a valuable gem or keeping an ear out for the creak of an item-carrying birdcage aren't the only ways to unearth rewards for backtracking and exploring off the beaten path. Animals can be tracked down and killed, with their meat turned into dishes that give permanent boosts to Ethan's health and defense. I definitely took some dark delight in slashing at a yard full of chickens with Ethan's pocket knife. Check it out, this is what Link sees every time you play The Legend of Zelda. No wonder he's too traumatized to speak. Elsewhere, there are countless invaluable story morsels that tie the village's inhabitants to the Umbrella Corporation, as well as entirely optional mini-boss fight encounters that in some instances manage to completely blindside me. It's clear that this Resident Evil isn't just called Village so that Capcom could awkwardly shove the Roman numerals for 8 into its logo, but because exploring the village itself is a central part of the experience. And although you visit each of the main villains' lairs in a set order, keys and other tools found along the way unlock new paths and secrets that make your return trips through Village's main hub a consistently rewarding journey. However, my trip through Resident Evil Village wasn't entirely without its missteps. I'm not sure Capcom was prepared for how much of a phenomenon Lady Dimitrescu would become with the Resident Evil fanbase, because despite the horniest hopes of internet perverts,
oh, be careful what you wish for.
Her appearance is certainly intimidatingly long-legged, but also disappointingly short-lived. She arrives very early on, is reasonably easy to avoid as far as stalker enemies go, and isn't as big a presence as you might expect from Village's billboard-sized poster girl. Her 3 daughters, meanwhile, all share the exact same weakness, and thus your fights against them all play out in almost identical fashion, though I will give them credit for never failing to jolt me out of my seat with their unpredictable arrivals.
Play with me some more!
Stop that. In fact, many of Village's boss encounters come up surprisingly short in a strategic sense. While they certainly escalate in scale and spectacle as you get closer to the story's climax, very few amount to much more than circle strafing and shooting them in their glowing bits until they drop. I would have welcomed a few more epic-sized showdowns that engaged my brain as much as my reflexes and ammo reserves. While there's not much to puzzle out when it comes to tackling bosses, there's just as little thinking involved when it comes to tackling Village's actual puzzles. As was the case in Resident Evil 7, the solutions to the bulk of Village's brain teasers are either exceedingly straightforward or, in many cases, entirely spoiled for you by instructional notes left in their immediate vicinity. I can understand the developers' reluctance to allow our forward momentum through the story and action sequences to stall, but that seems at odds with an experience that otherwise clearly wants you to regularly slow down and examine your surroundings. Once Village's story has been finished, you gain access to Mercenaries. This Time Attack arcade mode, which debuted in Resident Evil 3, returns with a few new gameplay tweaks and serves up some high-speed survival horror shooting that's only a few distorted guitar riffs away from actually passing as a Doom arena. Mercenaries consists of a multi-part gauntlet run through 4 stages taken from Village's campaign. Simply surviving isn't too taxing, but identifying the optimal path to the level goal and keeping your kill streak combo going is paramount in order to achieve some fairly challenging high-score goals. An extra layer of strategy has been included this time around in the form of special ability orbs, which allow you to activate perks such as more high-powered headshots or exploding enemy corpses. I'm finding this revival of Resident Evil's long-dormant Mercenaries mode to be an addictive bonus that I've already spent several hours with as I continue to chase those elusive S and SS rankings and their resulting special weapon unlocks.
Jesus Christ!
Roaming the streets of Resident Evil Village is like visiting a disturbing and deadly Disneyland, where every attraction is a house of horrors. I got just as big a thrill out of reveling in its frenzied violence as I did retracing my steps through the gradually revealed recesses of its sizable village setting to uncover the darkest story secrets of its monstrous main cast. Boss fights are a bit of a letdown, but the great variety of enemies throughout keeps things tense. The fact that it's very much a throwback to the fast-paced action of Resident Evil 4 also means it largely takes a step back from the slow burn scares of Resident Evil 7, which may well disappoint those who prefer more psychological dread to blowing off heads. But if you have an itch for action-heavy survival horror, then Resident Evil Village will scratch it like a fistful of Lady Dimitrescu's freakish fingernails. For more IGN reviews, check out our verdicts on Returnal and Total War Rome Remastered, and for everything else, stick with IGN.
Elena?
I said no!